In the quiet hum of the conservation lab at the National Museum of American History, Dr. Natalie Chen adjusted the settings on her high-resolution scanner. As the senior curator of photography, she had processed thousands of fragile images, daguerreotypes, tintypes, glass plates, each carrying a fragment of American memory. But the next photograph in her queue made her pause. It was dated 1853, labeled Caroline Montgomery with her companion Harriet. The image showed two teenage girls seated side by side on an ornate bench outside a plantation house. On the left sat a fair-haired white girl of about 14, her dress adorned with lace and ribbons. On the right, a dark-skinned girl of roughly 15, wearing a simpler but elegant gown. The symmetry of the composition, the apparent closeness, seemed almost tender. Historians had long cited it as proof of an exceptional interracial friendship in pre-Civil War Louisiana. Natalie leaned closer to her monitor, enlarging the digital image section by section. The detailing of the bench carvings, the magnolia blossoms at the frame's edge, the precision of the girl's posture. Then something glinted beneath the hem of the black girl's dress. A tiny metallic curve, half hidden in shadow. Natalie adjusted the contrast, sharpening the lower portion of the scan. Her breath caught. What appeared at first to be a delicate bracelet or shoe clasp revealed itself, on closer inspection, to be an ornate metal shackle, gold filigreed, designed to look decorative, but clearly a restraint fastened around the girl's ankle. Natalie's stomach twisted. The photograph, long celebrated as an emblem of friendship, was suddenly transformed into evidence of bondage, disguised as intimacy. "Dr. Whitaker needs to see this," she whispered into the sterile quiet of the lab. That evening, she sat alone reviewing her notes. The black girl's expression, once interpreted as reserved Victorian composure, now seemed haunted, her eyes carrying the quiet despair of someone forced to perform contentment. One image had shifted from innocence to indictment, and Natalie knew it was only the beginning. The next morning, she descended into the museum's temperature-controlled archive room, a maze of shelves filled with acid-free boxes. Within a folder marked Montgomery Collection, 1972 acquisition, she found the original donation papers from the family descendants. The description read simply, Caroline Montgomery with her companion Harriet, 1853. Companion. The word now felt like a euphemism carved out of cruelty. Dr. James Whitaker, Director of Historical Research, joined her as she spread the materials across the table. "The family claimed Harriet was a favored house servant," Natalie said quietly. "Almost as family." Whitaker frowned. "Almost as family." A common self-absolving narrative. Together, they sifted through plantation ledgers and inventories. Among the listings, cattle, furniture, human beings, they found an entry from 1851. Purchased girl, age 13, $800. Intended companion for Miss Caroline. Intended companion, Whitaker repeated slowly. So this was deliberate. She was bought to be a friend. In a diary belonging to Elizabeth Montgomery, Caroline's mother, they uncovered an even more chilling passage. Acquired a suitable companion for Caroline today. The girl is well-mannered and speaks well. Caroline is delighted with her new friend. Thomas has crafted a special arrangement that is both secure and befitting her position. Natalie closed her eyes. The special arrangement. That's the shackle. They turned imprisonment into adornment. More entries followed, describing how the two girls spent afternoons reading together, with Elizabeth praising the elegant gold filigree of the restraint as fitting for public appearance. "She wasn't just enslaved," Natalie said finally. "She was forced to perform friendship while being chained, a living ornament for the Montgomery family's virtue." Whitaker nodded gravely. "We'll need to look for others like her. If this happened here, it happened elsewhere." But in that single photograph, preserved for over a century, Natalie Chen had uncovered not a moment of tenderness, but a mask of captivity. And beneath its surface, the buried beginnings of a history the world had chosen not to see. Days after the discovery, Dr. Natalie Chen found herself in the National Archives, hunched over a microfilm reader. Her search was precise yet exhausting. One name, one voice she hoped still echoed somewhere in history. The plantation ledgers had confirmed Harriet's purchase. Elizabeth Montgomery's diary had revealed her cruel, special arrangement. But Natalie needed Harriet's own words, the missing half of a story written only by those who had owned her. After hours of scanning fragile typewritten pages, she froze at one line within the Federal Writers Project Slave Narratives from 1937. Interview with Harriet Johnson, born Louisiana 1838. Natalie's pulse quickened. The birth year matched. The location matched. Could it be her? She read on. I was bought special to be a friend to the daughter, Miss Caroline. They dressed me fine, taught me to read some, though it was against the law. But don't let that fool you about kindness. I wore a gold chain on my ankle for 4 years. Only took off when I was locked in my room at night. Natalie's eyes blurred. It wasn't just confirmation. It was confession from the depths of a memory buried alive. She printed the transcript and rushed it to Dr. Whitaker. This is her, Natalie said breathlessly. Harriet lived. She escaped. Whitaker adjusted his glasses, scanning the page. Listen to this, he murmured aloud. They called it my special bracelet. Said it was a privilege to wear gold when others wore iron. But a chain is a chain, no matter how pretty. Miss Caroline liked to pretend we were friends. Maybe she even believed it. But friends don't own friends. Silence fell between them, the kind that feels sacred. It wasn't just an artifact they were uncovering. It was a voice reclaiming itself from a century of silence. Harriet's account continued in vivid detail. She described being taught table manners, letters, and hymns, all while being forbidden to forget her place. The shackle, she said, was meant to remind her who she was, even when her dress said otherwise. The photographer came for Miss Caroline's 14th birthday. They put me in my best dress, still plainer than hers. She said we looked like sisters. I smiled for her picture, but I could feel the chain burning under the lace. That photograph, the very one Natalie had found, was a moment of forced performance, now turned against its creators by time and truth. Harriet's story ended with her escape during the Civil War, her flight north, and the family she later raised in Chicago. Her final words pierced the page like an accusation against history itself. People might look at the picture and see 2 girls being friends, not knowing one was property to the other. That's how slavery worked. It dressed itself up pretty, but underneath was always chains. Natalie exhaled, whispering, "She survived to tell us." Whitaker nodded slowly. "Then our job is to make sure the world listens." For the first time in 170 years, the truth of that photograph had a name, a voice, and a testimony. The friendship it depicted had been a lie, but the story that followed would be Harriet's truth unveiled. Weeks after discovering Harriet's testimony, the museum's research department had transformed into a hive of focused urgency. Under the hum of fluorescent lights, Dr. Natalie Chen gathered her small team in the conference room, the same place where the Montgomery photograph had first shattered its own myth. Beside her sat Dr. James Whitaker, now fully committed to the project, Dr. Marcus Johnson, an expert in 19th century slavery practices, and Emily Parker, a digital imaging specialist who had already begun rescanning other plantation photographs. Natalie projected the enhanced image of the Montgomery photo onto the screen. The contrast revealed the faint gleam of gold beneath Harriet's hem, unmistakable once seen. "This wasn't an isolated case," Natalie began. "If one enslaved child was forced to serve as a companion, there may be dozens more hidden in our archives." Emily tapped her tablet, showing a grid of thumbnails, faded photographs of plantation children and families. "I've developed an algorithm to search our database for similar patterns, interracial portraits, particularly where subjects are seated together, or where objects around the ankles or wrists show unusual reflections." Dr. Johnson nodded. "A visual audit of emotional manipulation," he said softly, "because that's what this was, enslavement disguised as affection." 2 weeks later, Emily returned with the first results. "We've identified 43 possible matches," she announced. The room fell silent as she displayed them one by one. In several, a white child sat beside a darker-skinned girl, the same calculated symmetry, the same false equality. Beneath hems and cuffs, Natalie and Emily began to notice repeating anomalies, small gleams, distorted edges, faint outlines of metal. In at least 7 of these, Emily explained, zooming in, the reflective shapes are identical to the Montgomery restraint, filigreed shackles, disguised as jewelry. Whitaker leaned back, his voice heavy. So the Montgomerys weren't an exception. They were the pattern. Marcus opened a folder of plantation correspondence. I've cross-referenced ledgers from Virginia, Georgia, and South Carolina. Some families listed companion purchases, children bought specifically to attend to their daughters. One diary from a Virginia mistress reads, "Purchased a bright young girl for Mary's companion. Commissioned a silversmith to craft an attractive chain that won't embarrass us in company." It's chilling how casually they wrote about it, like commissioning a tea set. Natalie felt the weight of it settle over her. They called it refinement, she whispered. But it was just control, dressed in civility. The researchers began calling it companionate enslavement, a term Marcus coined to describe the practice. It blended social cruelty with psychological bondage. A system where enslaved girls were made to perform friendship while physically restrained and emotionally manipulated. They weren't simply laborers, Marcus explained during a later debriefing. They were props, living mirrors of their owners' supposed benevolence. For plantation families isolated from society, it became a twisted status symbol. The more they uncovered, the clearer the pattern became. Letters between elite families showed a network of shared practices, instructions on where to purchase the finest, decorative anklets, how to train house companions, even how to disguise the restraints. With fabric or ribbon, they weren't hiding it. Natalie realized aloud one night as she examined yet another set of diaries. They believed it proved their kindness. They saw it as proof that they were enlightened owners. The photographs, once cherished heirlooms, were in fact monuments to hypocrisy, and now for the first time, they were being read correctly. Whitaker leaned over the glowing screen. If we display this publicly, it won't just rewrite one family's history, he warned. It'll rewrite the nation's understanding of its own innocence. Natalie's eyes stayed fixed on the image of Harriet and Caroline, the same image that had started everything. Then that's exactly what we'll do, she said quietly. We'll show the world the truth it framed as beauty. And so the plan began, an exhibition to expose what had been hidden in plain sight. The air in the museum's boardroom was heavy with unease. The long mahogany table gleamed under the recessed lights, but no one seemed comfortable enough to admire it. This was the meeting that would determine whether the truth Natalie's team had uncovered would ever reach the public. Dr. Natalie Chen sat with Director Richard Townsend, Dr. Eliza Washington, and Marcus Johnson, facing 3 representatives of the Montgomery family and their attorney. Projected on the wall behind Natalie was the enlarged photograph, Caroline and Harriet, 1853. The image looked serene, but everyone in the room now knew the truth concealed in its lower half. Eleanor Montgomery Williams, a silver-haired woman in her 70s, broke the silence first. "This is preposterous," she snapped, her voice trembling with indignation. "You're defaming my ancestors based on a smudge in an old photograph." Natalie, calm but unflinching, tapped her tablet. The enhanced scan appeared on the screen, the metallic filigree clearly visible around Harriet's ankle. "It's not a smudge, Ms. Williams," she said evenly. "It's a shackle, disguised as jewelry. And we found 7 other examples just like it. The evidence is overwhelming." The family's attorney leaned forward. "You're interpreting shadows and speculation. And this so-called interview with an elderly woman, how can you prove she was the same Harriet?" Natalie turned another page on the tablet. "Because every detail aligns. The names, the year, the plantation, even the description of the gold restraint. And," she said, glancing directly at Eleanor, "we also have your great-great-grandmother's diary. She describes a suitable companion for Caroline and notes that her husband crafted a special arrangement that is both secure and befitting. Those are her own words." The color drained slightly from Eleanor's. Face Director Townsend tried diplomacy. "Mrs. Williams, our intention isn't to shame your family. This practice wasn't unique to the Montgomerys. It was systemic, cultural, and cruel. But we cannot erase it because it's uncomfortable." Eleanor's jaw tightened. "My ancestors were respected members of Louisiana society. They treated their people well, for the times." Marcus Johnson, unable to stay silent, leaned forward. "With respect, ma'am, Forcing a child to pretend friendship while being shackled isn't kindness in any era. The room went still. The attorney cleared his throat. The donation agreement gives the family certain rights regarding display and interpretation. We could pursue an injunction. Townsend exhaled slowly. You could, he admitted, but it would only delay the inevitable. Dr. Chen's research will be published independently. The question is whether your family wants to be seen as facing history honestly, or trying to bury it again. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, unexpectedly, Eliza Montgomery, a younger woman seated at the far end, spoke softly. "Grandmother, maybe we shouldn't fight this. Times have changed. If this helps tell the truth, maybe it's time." Eleanor looked at her, stunned, then slowly turned away. After hours of negotiation, a compromise was reached. The Montgomery family would not block the exhibition, but they would include a brief statement acknowledging their ancestors' participation in a morally unacceptable system while contextualizing them as products of their time. As the meeting ended, Eleanor paused at the doorway and looked back at Natalie. "You think you're doing something noble," she said quietly. "But you're just digging up pain better left buried." Natalie met her eyes. Harriet couldn't speak when she was alive, but she left her words for us to find. "Don't you think she deserves to be heard now?" Eleanor said nothing and walked away. That night, as Natalie returned to her office, she stared once more at the photograph pinned on the research board. The two girls still sat side by side, calm, composed, trapped in an illusion of equality. But now the illusion was broken. The museum had approved the exhibition. The truth would not stay buried any longer. In 6 months, hidden in plain sight captive companions would open to the public. And for the first time, Harriet's story would take its rightful place in the history that once silenced her. The grand opening of Hidden in Plain Sight, Captive Companions, was unlike anything the museum had hosted before. The line stretched from the marble steps down to Constitution Avenue. Journalists, historians, students, descendants, all gathered beneath the banner that bore Harriet's image. Inside, the museum lights were softened, focused only where truth demanded to be seen. The exhibition unveiled at the center stood the Montgomery photograph, enlarged to life-size. Visitors approached quietly, drawn to its deceptive calm. The two girls, Caroline and Harriet, sat side by side as they had for over a century and a half. But now, beneath the new lighting system, a subtle shimmer revealed what had always been hidden, the golden restraint around Harriet's ankle. When visitors pressed the nearby button, the lighting shifted to isolate the shackle, and an audible gasp often followed. Beneath the photograph, engraved on black marble, were Harriet's own words. "People look at the picture and see two girls being friends, not knowing one was property to the other. That's how slavery worked. It dressed itself up pretty, but underneath was always chains." Beside the image, a short biographical panel read, "Harriet Johnson, 1838–1911, born enslaved on the Montgomery Plantation, Louisiana. Purchased at age 13 as a companion to the family's daughter, Caroline Montgomery. Escaped during the Civil War. Recorded her story in Chicago in 1937 for the Federal Writers Project. The crowd moved slowly, reverently. Many visitors reached out, instinctively, as if to touch the air between themselves and the photograph. Echoes of others along the walls. Dozens of other photographs, once thought to depict warmth and civility, now told a different story. Digital restoration revealed the faint outlines of disguised shackles, locks concealed beneath lace, ribbons hiding chains. A section titled "The Gallery of Companions" documented the broader practice uncovered by Natalie's team, the companionate enslavement system that had once been widespread among elite Southern families. Each display included excerpts from diaries, auction records, and testimonies of enslaved girls forced to live as ornamental friends. Beside one glass case sat the golden restraint cuff preserved by Gloria Thompson, the descendant of another companion named Rachel. It gleamed under the museum lights, elegant yet monstrous, with a small latch hidden inside the delicate design. A crowd gathered as Gloria spoke softly, her voice steady but trembling with pride. "My grandmother kept this, so we would never forget what beauty can hide." She said freedom begins when you stop pretending something cruel was ever kind. The audience fell silent. Cameras clicked. History had come alive, and it was speaking for itself. Resistance and reconciliation. Not everyone welcomed what the exhibition revealed. The Montgomery family's older representatives stayed silent, offering only formal statements. But younger descendants, including Eliza Montgomery, returned often. One evening she stood before Harriet's photograph, tears in her eyes. "She deserved better," she said to Natalie. They both did. Eliza later donated something extraordinary, a leather-bound diary she had found among her grandmother's belongings after her death. Inside were the handwritten thoughts of Caroline Montgomery, the white girl from the photograph. Natalie handled it with white gloves, her breath catching as she read the entries aloud. "Harriet looked sad today. I told her she was lucky to be my friend instead of working in the fields. She said nothing, but I saw her touch the chain at her ankle when she thought I wasn't looking. Sometimes I wish she didn't have to wear it, but Mother says it's necessary. I gave her a ribbon to make it prettier." Natalie closed the diary slowly, the paper whispering like an echo of remorse across time. "She was a child," she murmured, "a child trying to understand a system that had already shaped her soul." The diary was later placed beside Harriet's testimony, two perspectives, side by side, finally united in truth. The transformation. By the exhibition's end, tens of thousands had visited. The press hailed it as one of the most significant historical re-evaluations in modern museum history. Academic journals began publishing studies on companionate enslavement. New algorithms developed by Emily Parker were used by other institutions to re-examine their archives. In 1 year, over 60 more images of enslaved companions were identified across the American South. Forgotten names emerged, hidden chains were revealed, and for the first time, museums began rewriting captions that had stood unchallenged for a century. Director Townsend's earlier fears about controversy melted into admiration. "It's the most powerful exhibition we've ever produced," he told Natalie one evening. "Controversy passes. Truth endures." Natalie smiled faintly. "That's all Harriet ever wanted. To endure." The legacy a year later, as the exhibition prepared to travel to Chicago, Natalie sat alone in her office surrounded by archival boxes. On her desk rested the same photograph, now reframed for preservation. The image no longer haunted her. It humbled her. She looked at the two girls, one smiling softly, one holding her sadness in silence, and whispered, "We finally saw you, Harriet. We finally listened." The shackle gleamed faintly in the light from her desk lamp, gold and cruel all at once. Proof that even beauty can lie, but truth once uncovered never does. Natalie placed Caroline's diary back in its acid-free case, labeled it carefully, and sealed it for the museum's permanent collection. Two lives, once divided by bondage, now preserved side by side in history's record. As the lights dimmed and the museum settled into silence, the portrait remained. No longer a lie, no longer an illusion. It had become something greater, a confession, a lesson, and a monument to the truth that had waited 172 years to be seen.